Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be looking at Neville Goddard today, and he is a mid-20th century spiritual teacher,
Oh, yeah.
and we're going to do a deep dive into one of his lectures called Eternal States. And so this one's all about like how our state of being shapes our reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that it can be a really fascinating topic.
Yeah.
Goddard's ideas can sound a little bit out there sometimes, but I think if you really dig into it, there's a lot of practical wisdom to be found.
Yeah, I love that practical wisdom. So like where do we even like begin with this idea of eternal states? It sounds kind of like heavy, you know?
Well, I think that, Goddard starts with talking about the Jordan, and this is where it gets really interesting because he uses this metaphor of like the Jordan River as kind of like a dividing line. And it's not necessarily a physical place.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? It's more about the limitations we feel in our lives,
Yeah.
the things that make us feel stuck.
Okay, so like my Jordan could be anything from like, being stuck in a job I don't really like,
Yeah.
or like wishing I had more money, or even just like struggling with self-doubt.
Exactly. I think it's about like recognizing those obstacles or boundaries that seem to be holding us back from what we truly desire. And I think Goddard really encourages us to kind of like acknowledge our current state, to look at it honestly without judgment.
See, that sounds tough though. Isn't it easier to just ignore all the negative feelings and pretend everything's fine?
Well, yeah, it might seem easier, in the short term, but Goddard suggests that by facing our Jordan head on, we can actually empower ourselves to move beyond it. And he actually uses himself as a really good example.
Oh yeah, he was living in New York City feeling totally broke and stuck, and he like really wanted to go to Barbados, but he couldn't afford it. I can totally relate to that feeling of like wanting something so bad, but not seeing how it could ever happen.
Exactly. And that's the perfect example. And yet instead of getting bogged down in the keel, how Goddard focused on the feeling of already being in Barbados, and he called this like treading out the wine press.
Wait, so he just like sat around daydreaming about being on a beach? I mean, like that's fun and all, but how did that actually get him to Barbados?
Well, that's where it gets really powerful,
Mhm.
because Goddard believed that imagination is not just some whimsical activity. It's actually like the creative force of the universe. Treading the wine press is about more than just daydreaming. It's about vividly imagining yourself in your desired state as if it were already true. It's about feeling those emotions, engaging the senses, and truly embodying that reality in your mind.
So like instead of stressing about how he was going to afford the plane ticket, he focused on the feeling of the warm sun on his skin, the sound of the waves, the taste of tropical fruits. It's almost like a mental vacation.
Exactly. He fully immersed himself in the experience of being in Barbados, and guess what?
He like manifested a plane ticket.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He actually received a ticket and the money for the trip from a friend completely out of the blue. And this is kind of a key takeaway from Goddard's story.
Yeah.
He didn't try to figure out how he simply trusted that by occupying the state of being in Barbados, reality would conform.
That's mind-blowing. So it's not about wishing or hoping, it's about believing it's already happened.
It's about shifting your state of being. Remember, Goddard believed that we're constantly moving between these different states of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
We can choose to dwell in the state of lack and limitation, or we can choose to step into the state of already having what we desire.
Okay, so how do we actually make that shift? Is it just like willpower?
Well, willpower can help, but Goddard suggests using a much more powerful tool. And, it's something that we all possess. It's the power of I am. And he taught that this is actually the name of God, the creative force within each of us.
Well, hold on. I'm not sure I'm ready to like claim divine power just yet.
Well, it's not about becoming a deity. It's about recognizing this creative power within you. And, Goddard actually had a friend named Abdullah who I think really embodied this principle.
Probably do, like manifest a yacht or something.
I definitely had a knack for manifesting. But, he actually helped Goddard understand this concept when Goddard was still really fixated on his lack of resources to get to Barbados. And Abdullah simply told him, you were in Barbados.
Wait, what? Even though Goddard was still in New York?
Exactly. And at first, Goddard was a little confused, thought maybe his friend was a little off his rocker.
Mm-hmm.
But Abdullah refused to discuss the logistics because, in his mind, Goddard was already there. He understood that by declaring I am desired state, we align ourselves with that reality.
So instead of saying I want to be wealthy, I should say I am wealthy.
Precisely. But it's
Yeah.
not just about saying the words,
Yeah.
It's about feeling the state of wealth, embodying it fully in your imagination.
Okay, so we've got this idea of the Jordan representing our limitations, then the power of imagination to cross that Jordan, and then this I am thing to like help us shift our state of being. I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together, but where does the concept of eternal states actually come into play?
That's a great question. And it's actually something that we're going to dive much deeper into the next part of our deep dive. Remember how I said that we're constantly moving between these different states of consciousness? Well, these states are fluid. They're not fixed. We can shift from feeling stuck and limited to feeling empowered and abundant. And I think the key is to become aware of what state we're currently in so we can consciously choose a different one.
Okay, I'm intrigued. This is all starting to make sense, but I have so many more questions. We'll be right back after a quick break to explore this idea of eternal states and how it can help us create the life we desire.
Okay, so we're back and ready to really explore this whole eternal states thing. And I'm still wrapping my head around how our state of being can actually shape our reality. It's a pretty powerful idea.
It really is, and I think understanding this concept can be a huge game changer when it comes to creating the life we want.
So break it down for me. What exactly does eternal states mean? Okay, so think of it this way. Our consciousness is kind of like a river. It's constantly flowing. Sometimes the river is calm and peaceful. Other times it's turbulent and choppy. And these different states of consciousness are always in flux. They're not fixed or permanent. That's why Goddard called them eternal, because they're always changing, always in motion.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this concept actually help us in our daily lives?
Well, I think it helps us understand that we're not stuck in any one state. We always have the power to choose a different state. It's about recognizing that we are not our thoughts or our feelings. We are the awareness that experiences them.
So if I'm feeling anxious or overwhelmed, I can choose to shift into a state of calm and peace.
Exactly. It's not about denying or suppressing those negative feelings. It's about recognizing that they're simply a state of consciousness, and we can choose to move into a different state.
But what about those times when it feels like we're just being pulled back into those negative states? Even when we're trying so hard to stay positive. Goddard mentioned something about starting each day back at the Jordan.
Yeah, he did. And that's a really crucial point.
Yeah.
Even if we have a night of incredible dreams or insights, we wake up and find ourselves back at the riverbank of our current reality.
So are we doomed to constantly battle those limitations? It sounds kind of exhausting.
Not at all. I think it's more about recognizing that this is the starting point of our day. And from there, we have a choice. Goddard uses the phrase, choose you this day whom you will serve.
Ooh, that sounds biblical. Is he talking about choosing between good and evil?
I don't think it's so much about morality. It's more about choosing what we focus on. Will we focus on the limitations of our current reality? Or will we focus on the limitless possibilities of our imagination? Will we serve the gods of the Amorites, those limiting beliefs that kind of keep us bound to the land of our current reality? Or will we serve the gods of our fathers, the boundless potential that lies beyond our Jordan?
Okay, I'm seeing the analogy here. So it's every morning we wake up and we decide, am I going to stay stuck in my old patterns or am I going to step into a new reality?
You got it. And it's not always an easy choice. But by becoming aware of our state of being, we can start to make more conscious choices that align with our desires.
This reminds me of Gator's story about wanting to go to Barbados. He didn't just wish he was there. He actually imagined being there, feeling it, experiencing it fully in his mind. He made that choice to occupy the state of already being in Barbados.
Right, and that's exactly what we can do too. We can use our imagination to tread the winepress.
Yeah.
To create the feeling of already having what we desire.
But isn't it hard to maintain that positive state when you're faced with real challenges? If I'm struggling to pay my bills, it's hard to just ignore that and pretend everything's fine.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's not about denying the reality of our current circumstances. It's about choosing to focus on the desired outcome, on the feeling of relief and satisfaction that comes with having what we want. So, for example, instead of dwelling on the lack of money, you can imagine the feeling of having paid all your bills in full. Of having a healthy bank balance.
So it's more about shifting the emotional energy around the situation rather than trying to deny the reality of it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We're not trying to deceive ourselves. We're choosing to focus on the desired state and to feel the emotions that are associated with that state.
This reminds me of something that Goddard said about prayer. He talked about it being a motion towards or nearness at a session to nearness at or in the vicinity of.
Wow, that's a really powerful definition. Because it suggests that prayer is not about begging or pleading, It's about aligning ourselves with the reality we desire.
So instead of like asking God to do something for us, we're using prayer as a way to move closer to our desired state, like both mentally and emotionally.
Exactly. We're using our imagination to kind of bridge that gap between where we are and where we want to be.
Mm.
We're choosing to dwell in the state of having our prayers already answered.
Wow, that's a really different way of looking at prayer. I'm starting to see how this whole concept of eternal states can apply to so many areas of our lives. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose our state of being, and that in doing so, we can shape our reality.
You're getting it.
Yeah.
And it's not just some like abstract concept.
Mm.
Godard shared countless stories about how he used this technique to manifest his desires, and he encouraged others to do the same, to experiment with it and see for themselves how it could transform their lives.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to start experimenting. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, I think we need to address the elephant in the room, the proof. Some of our listeners might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but where's the evidence? How do I know this stuff actually works?
That's a totally fair question. And while Godard didn't offer like scientific proof in the traditional sense, he shared many compelling anecdotes from his own life and the lives of others who used his technique to manifest their desires.
He did mention that he even manifested things unintentionally sometimes. Like that time he was trying to avoid the snow in New York City by imagining himself in sunny Barbados.
That's right. And what happened? He ended up having to go to Barbados because of a family emergency. It wasn't exactly the vacation he had in mind, but it definitely proved that our imagination has like a really powerful influence on our reality.
Whoa, that's kind of freaky, but also kind of awesome. It sounds like our imagination is a lot more powerful than we give it credit for.
Absolutely. And Godard really emphasized that we need to be mindful of what we're imagining,
Hmm.
because it can manifest in ways that we might not expect. He encouraged us to use our imagination wisely and lovingly, always considering the highest good for ourselves and for others.
So it's like we have this amazing tool at our disposal, but we need to learn how to use it responsibly. Like we wouldn't just hand someone a chainsaw without proper instruction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagination is like a really potent force, and it's crucial to use it with intention and awareness. Godard encouraged us to experiment, to play with it, and to see for ourselves how it can transform our lives. But he also stressed the importance of using it for good, for creating a reality that benefits not just ourselves, but also the world around us.
This is all so mind-blowing. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this whole eternal states concept. Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap things up?
Well, there's one more key idea from Godard's lecture that we haven't really discussed yet. And it's this concept of the 3 days in resurrection. It's like a really powerful analogy that can help us understand the process of manifestation.
Oh, right. I remember him mentioning that, but I have to admit I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Can you break it down for us?
Absolutely. We'll delve into that really intriguing concept in the final part of our deep dive. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm ready to tackle this whole 3 days in resurrection thing. It sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
Is Godard talking about literal death and resurrection here?
Not quite. He's using this biblical story as a metaphor to explain how our desires actually manifest in reality. It's about understanding the process of creation, the journey from the seed of an idea to its full blossoming in the physical world.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I'm still not quite sure how a biblical story about resurrection connects to manifesting our desires.
Okay, well, think of it this way. When we plant a seed in the ground, we don't see it sprout immediately. It takes time for it to germinate, to take root, and to eventually push its way up through the soil.
So the seed is like our desire, and the soil is like our subconscious mind.
Exactly. Godard interprets the 3 days as a symbolic representation of the gestation period, the time it takes for our desires to take root and grow in that unseen realm of our subconscious.
So it's not about waiting around for 3 literal days.
No, it's about understanding that there's a natural process of unfolding, We plant the seed of our desire through our imagination, we nourish it with faith and feeling, and then we allow it to blossom in its own time.
That makes sense. But what about the resurrection part of the analogy?
Well, the 3rd day symbolizes that moment of manifestation when our desire actually breaks through into our physical reality. It's that moment when the seed sprouts, when the unseen becomes seen.
So it's like a sudden breakthrough, a moment of, aha, everything clicks into place.
It can feel like that.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that this resurrection isn't always a dramatic event. Sometimes it's a gradual unfolding, a series of synchronicities that kind of lead us to our desired outcome.
That's reassuring. I was starting to worry that I'd need to witness some huge miracle for my desires to manifest. So if we're not supposed to be focused on the how and we're trusting in this unseen process of resurrection, What are we supposed to be doing while we wait?
Well, that's where the real work comes in, you know? It's about cultivating the feeling of already having what we desire. It's about choosing our state, aligning our thoughts and emotions with the reality we want to create.
So it's not just about like passively waiting around. It's about actively choosing to dwell in the state of our desires.
Precisely. Remember Goddard's emphasis on occupying the state. It's not enough to just visit the feeling for a few minutes each day. We need to make it our mental and emotional home.
It sounds like it takes a lot of effort to stay in that state, though, especially when life throws curveballs our way. How do we stay focused and not get discouraged when things aren't happening as quickly as we'd like?
Well, that's where faith comes in,
Yeah.
you know? It's about trusting that the universe is working with us, that things are unfolding in divine timing. It's about surrendering to the wisdom of a higher power and letting go of the need to control every little detail.
That makes sense. It's like having faith that the seed we planted will grow even though we can't see what's happening beneath the surface. But what if doubt creeps in? What if we start to lose faith?
Doubt is natural. It's
Yeah.
part of the human experience, you know?
Yeah.
But we don't have to let it derail us. When doubt arises, simply acknowledge it and then gently redirect your focus back to the feeling of your desire being fulfilled.
So it's like a mental muscle we're developing. The more we practice choosing faith over doubt, the stronger that muscle becomes.
Exactly. And like any muscle, it takes consistent effort and practice. But the rewards are well worth it.
Yeah.
When we master the art of faith, we unlock a world of infinite possibilities.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. I feel like we've uncovered so many powerful insights about how to create the life we desire. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure our listeners have some practical takeaways. What are some key things they can start doing today to put these teachings into practice?
Well, I think the most important thing is to start paying attention to your state of being, you know?
Yeah.
Become aware of your thoughts and feelings throughout the day. Where's your focus? Are you dwelling in lack and limitation, or are you aligned with the reality you want to experience?
So it's about cultivating self-awareness, becoming more conscious of our internal world.
Absolutely. And once you're aware of your state, you can start making conscious choices to shift it. If you find yourself feeling negative or stuck, use your imagination to tread the winepress. Visualize yourself in your desired state. Feel the emotions, engage your senses, and truly embody that reality in your mind.
And don't forget about the power of I am. Instead of saying, I want to be healthy, declare I am healthy. Feel the state of health, embody it fully.
That's right. And remember, it's not just about thinking positive thoughts. It's about cultivating the feeling of your desires being fulfilled. It's about choosing to dwell in the state of already having what you want.
And most importantly, have faith. Trust that the universe is working with you, that things are unfolding in perfect timing. Surrender to the process and let go of the need to control every little detail.
Beautifully said. Remember, you are not your circumstances.
Yeah.
You are not your thoughts or feelings. You are the awareness that experiences them all. And within that awareness lies the power to choose to create, to transform your life in extraordinary ways.
That's such a perfect note to end on. So listeners, go out there and experiment with these really powerful concepts. Tread your own wine press, choose your state, and have faith in the unseen forces that are always working in your favor. The world is your canvas, and you are the artist. Create a masterpiece.